Greetings. My name is Maynard Pittendray, and I'm happy to present this session of our Bible study in Revelation. This is the fourth in a series of studies on Revelation. And today we begin with chapter 8, beginning with verse 6. Let's listen to the word of the Lord. Then the seven angels who had seven trumpets prepared to sound them. The first angel sounded his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled down on the earth. A third of the earth was burned up, a third of the trees were burned up, and all of the green grass was burned up. The second angel sounded his trumpet, and something like a huge mountain all ablaze was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea was turned into blood. A third of the living creatures of the sea died. A third of the ships were destroyed. It's a very uplifting passage, don't you agree? Continuing with verse 10. A third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star blazing like a torch fell from the sky on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star was Wormwood. A third of the waters were turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter. A fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, a third of the stars, and a third of them turned dark. A third of the day was without light. You get the point. There are many other trumpets to come, 7 in all, in case you didn't guess. But you get the idea. Revelation says that we will be confronted with terrible and catastrophic events. I don't know how literal to take these or whether they're symbols, but I am sure that the message is clear that there's destruction and tragedy in everyone's future, and some of these are global events. We're living through one right now, the pandemic of 2020. And whatever we are going through in our own individual lives, we may be well and safe at home. We may be working in hazardous situations like in a grocery store or a hospital or who knows what. We're going through a very difficult time. And we have to ask ourselves, and we ask this question as we go through our life, and we ask this question as we read about all these trumpets and the bad things that are happening. How can God allow this? How can a loving God allow this? Now, we hear this conversation many times in our lives. How can a loving God allow suffering? And Revelation has a lot of suffering. In the book of Job, in the Old Testament, there's a man who suffers terribly. He loses his children, his wealth, his health. He's in a very painful disease. He loses about everything except his wife and a few friends who try to comfort him. Probably Job, being a wise man, probably wished he had lost those as well. They're not very helpful and loving. But Job keeps saying that he wished that God would show up and explain himself and explain why he has suffered so terribly. He was a righteous man. And eventually, God does show up, and he speaks at great length to Job. But he doesn't explain why Job has had to suffer, or why any of us have to suffer, and why this pandemic is having to show up now. What he does do is he talks about what it is to be God. What's in his job description? He controls the stars. He controls the mountain lions that no one ever sees. He controls the weather. He holds the universe together. And he never explains why Job has had to suffer. Job never gets an answer. But at the end of the book, Job is completely satisfied. And if you read the book of Job, and it's a pretty lengthy book, if you read the book of Job, at the end of it, you feel like you must have skipped a page or two. Why is Job satisfied? Because while he never got the answer to the question why, he got an answer to the question who. He understood that God was present with him. And knowing who was with him, God was with him, was all that it took to satisfy Job. And we are sick, and we're isolated, and we're concerned about our family and friends, and maybe we're well, and our greatest problem is boredom, but we're anxious about the future. And we may be asking, why can't people go back to work? Why aren't the schools and churches open? In the middle of all these terrible things, we need to ask not why, but who. In Revelation chapter 10, verse 10, there is a great answer to what we're going through in this pandemic. Let me begin reading with verse 10 of chapter 10. And then I saw a mighty angel coming down from heaven. He was robed in a cloud with a rainbow over his head. His face was like the sun. His legs were like fiery pillars. He was holding a little scroll, which he lay open in his hand. He planted his right foot on the sea, his left foot on the land. He gave a loud shout like the roar of a lion, and when he shouted, the voices of the seven thunders spoke. And when the seven thunders spoke, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven say, seal up what the seven thunders have said, and do not write it down. This is a confusing text. Unlike everything else in Revelation, yeah, this is a confusing text. What in the world is all this about? The fiery legs, 1 foot on land, 1 foot in the sea, this little scroll he's holding in his hand, and John's about to write down what it says, and he's told not to write it down. Well, the angel is a messenger. That's what angels primarily are in the Bible. And the message here is a brief one. And John is able to know what the message is, but John is told not to share it with us. And I think the message that we get out of that is that not every Christian is allowed insight into every revelation and everything that God does. This is a message for John, not for us. And there are times when we have to accept that we cannot comprehend something of God. We are at peace with the things we do not understand, trusting that God is in control. This is a central passage for Revelation because it teaches us that in the face of an often confusing book, Revelation, be at peace and trust God. In the face of an often confusing life, be at peace and trust God. In the Old Testament book of Isaiah, chapter 40, the question is asked, who has understood the mind of God? Well, the answer, of course, is nobody. We get glimpses and that's it. When bad things like the pandemic happens, we ask why. That's natural. Why did God do this or allow that? That's not the question to ask. Ask the question who. Who is with us? Well, God is with us. And that's a great message from Revelation. May the Lord bless you and keep you.